welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Hamas says head of its government in the Gaza Strip is among more than 400 people killed in a wave of Israeli strikes on the Palestinian territory amid the stalled truce talks. Taiwan detects 59 Chinese aircraft around the self-ruled island, the highest tally since a record in October, and days after Taiwanese president called on China a foreign hostile force. Artillery fire from Sudan's paramilitary RSF kills at least 10 people in Omdurman, the capital of Khartoum's twin city. Now, this comes hours after the Sudanese army made significant gains elsewhere in the capital to recapture territory from the RSF. Tunisian authorities rescue 612 migrants and recover the bodies of 18 others in several operations overnight off the country's Mediterranean coast. This after a boat capsized carrying migrants from sub-Saharan African countries to Europe. And astronauts Anita Williams and Butch Wilmore are on their way back to Earth after a 9-month overstay at the International Space Station. Their return is part of a NASA contingency plan assisted by Elon Musk's SpaceX. Hello and welcome. We start with the latest updates from the DRC and Rwanda, the neighboring African nations locked in a years-long conflict. The much-anticipated direct talks between the DRC and the Rwanda-backed M23 group, which has waged insurgency in the DRC's east, have once again hit a roadblock. The M23 group has pulled out of the peace talks, scheduled to take place today in Angola's capital of Luanda. The M23 snub comes just after the European Union announced sanctions on several of its top commanders. The rebel group claims that these sanctions undermine direct dialogue and prevent any meaningful progress. Since January, the M23 has captured the provincial capitals of Goma and Bukavu in the DRC's resource-rich east. Now, according to the DRC authorities, the renewed clashes have killed over 7,000 people. And its withdrawal from these talks, the rebel group accused Kinshasa of waging a bellicose campaign against it. But the Democratic Republic of Congo government has confirmed it will still participate despite the M23's no-show. Now, this is not the first time that talks have fallen apart. The DRC President Felix Tshisekedi and Rwandan President Paul Kagame were expected to meet in Luanda last December for direct negotiations. However, disagreements over the terms of engagement led to a last-minute cancellation. Since then, the M23 offensive has intensified, with a rapid and strategic advance across the eastern DRC. Kinshasa continues to accuse Rwanda of backing the M23 rebels and using them to loot Congo's vast mineral wealth. The United Nations estimates that up to 4,000 Rwandan troops are operating inside the eastern DRC. However, Rwanda has neither confirmed nor denied troops' presence in the DRC. In the latest, it has cut diplomatic ties with its former colonizer Belgium. Kigali accuses Brussels of taking sides in the conflict and consistently undermining Rwanda's position. All Belgian diplomats have been ordered to leave Rwandan territory. Now, President Kagame has also issued a warning to Belgium against interfering in Rwanda's internal affairs.
Rwanda's concern is that we were colonized by a small country, similar in size to Rwanda itself, and they wanted to divide us because of that. I mean Belgium. I want to give them a warning. Belgium has caused significant harm to Rwanda even in history, 30 years ago, and they continue to follow and interfere with us. We warned them before, and we are prepared to warn them again.
Belgium responded swiftly, calling Rwanda's actions disproportionate. Brussels has vowed to retaliate by expelling Rwandan diplomats from Belgium. This diplomatic tit-for-tat marks a sharp deterioration in relations and raises fears of wider escalation. Belgium is the former colonial power in both the DRC and Rwanda. It has been a leading voice in the EU, pushing for a suspension of raw material trade agreements with Rwanda. Meanwhile, Rwanda faces growing international pressure to withdraw its alleged support for the M23 rebels. The UK and Germany have announced aid cuts, and while the US and Canada have imposed sanctions. Despite the mounting global backlash, Kigali remains defiant. Will its hardline stance and the M23's latest peace talk boycott plunge the DRC into even deeper crisis? We will continue our coverage of the DRC crisis. And as Africa continues to grapple with prolonged wars without a clear solution, Ghana emphasizes that peace must come from within. Ghana's Foreign Minister Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa spoke at the Firstpost Ideas Pod at the Raisina Dialogue 2025. In a conversation with Sarah Motswetsa, the CEO of Human Sciences Research Council in South Africa. The Ghanaian minister stressed that the scramble for resources has been a major driver of conflicts across the continent, and that external actors must stay away from Africa's matters. Listen in to the whole conversation.
G20 in the continent, yes, in South Africa, but really in the continent. What do you think we should be able to leverage from maybe let's start with Ghana, South Africa, as part of AU. What should we be able to leverage from G20?
So first of all, I think that I would like to commend the Indian government, and since we are in New Delhi, it was during their chairmanship that they made a strong case for the African Union to be admitted, and I think that Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government have been really committed to South-South, cooperation and really advancing the cause of Africa. So we're excited now to be on board, full membership from last year, and it's great that South Africa is chairing, and there's a lot that we expect from President Ramaphosa. Having said that, I think that the greatest obstacle as we speak now is the conflict in Ukraine, and I would want that our leadership of the G20 is leveraged, because really if you look at the key actors, whether in Europe, whether in the United States of America, even within the United Nations, because of how vetoes have been used and all of that, there's a breakdown of trust. And so you can't achieve the goals of G20, the founding fathers of G20, because really this was meant to, champion industrialization, create economic wealth, and expand, trade opportunities. But if you look at the focus now, and 3 years of war in Ukraine, over $380 billion spent. That is money that could solve Africa's infrastructure crisis. Do away with the homelessness in all of these G20 countries, you know, and really empower young people. But a lot of funds is being moved away from international development, from supporting healthcare, education, you know, electricity, into Ukraine, into war. So I would love that, you know, the African Union, South Africa leadership is looked up to as a trusted mediator. Look, there is work to be done, and we should not be spending all our resources on needless wars, avoidable wars, wars that must not be allowed to continue.
Minister, maybe let me bring you home. Right, let me bring you home.
Yeah.
The continent is also plagued with its own wars.
Yeah.
The Sahel. We've
Yeah.
just had a major conflict in Rwanda and DRC, and unfortunately, South Africa was caught in the middle.
Yeah.
Before we get to other conflicts, as you rightfully say, there's conflict in the continent, and don't you think that the AU and particularly Ghana and South Africa has a role to play in ensuring that there is peace in the continent, that we silence the guns, as we say, and that we channel our resources, mineral resources, towards our own economic development? So what should be AU and our own stance in terms of our own, be they political policies or even economic, without going outside the continent? So wanting us to talk about us.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that charity must begin at home, and when you are anti-war, you are anti-war, and everywhere there is war, we have to speak out against these wars. And really, if you look at the wars plaguing the continent, again, you see some of these same actors divide and rule, taking advantage of a divided continent. And it's always about our resources. It's always about the uranium, about the gold, about the diamond, the bauxite, you know, the timber, you know. So it is for us to really fend off, ward off all of these external actors, and we ourselves positioning ourselves in a way that we don't become vulnerable to all of these, you know, unseen hands, who we have a fair idea who they are, you know, right from slavery to colonialism and all of that. Africa has been at the receiving end of all of these, you know, new colonial actors who, you know, will do anything to divide our ranks, to have access to our resources. So I agree with you that it's important for us to confront head on the conflicts that are plaguing the continent.
We now turn our attention to South Africa, caught in a diplomatic row with Taiwan following tensions with the United States. Taiwan has strongly objected to South Africa's decision to rename its unofficial embassy in Pretoria from the Taipei Liaison Office to, quote-unquote, the Taipei Commercial Office. Now, the name change has been reflected on the official website of South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, despite the ongoing negotiations between the two sides. Taiwan has reacted by claiming that its office was reportedly placed under the international organizations represented in South Africa, instead of being recognized as an individual entity. Taiwan insists the office was established under a 1997 agreement between the two sides and called on South Africa to expedite talks regarding the location, timeline and terms of future cooperation. The move comes weeks after the Ramaphosa government gave Taiwan until March to relocate its de facto embassy out of Pretoria. Reports suggest that South Africa cited the One China policy and a UN General Assembly resolution which recognized Taiwan as a province of China as the reason for the name change and the demand to relocate from Pretoria. Now, on Monday, Beijing reiterated its stance on Taiwan, calling on the UN member states to strictly adhere to the One China principle and reject Taiwan's independence claims. Taipei has maintained self-rule since 1949 and insists on its independence from Beijing. But it has formal diplomatic ties with only 12 countries. China, meanwhile, claims Taiwan as its own territory and has never ruled out using force to bring it under its control.
First of all, Taiwan is a part of China. There is no president, and what you mentioned is not a diplomatic issue. What I can tell you is that no matter what the DPP authorities say, it cannot change the fact that Taiwan is a part of China, nor can it change the inevitable event of reunification with the motherland.
South Africa officially cut diplomatic ties with Taiwan in 1997, but allowed Taipei to maintain a symbolic presence through a liaison office in the capital. Today, Pretoria maintains formal relations only with Beijing, its largest global trading partner. Last year, South Africa asked Taiwan to relocate its liaison office, reportedly suggesting it be re-established as a trade office in Johannesburg instead. Now, critics argue the move is an attempt to strengthen ties with China amid South Africa's diplomatic rift with Washington. Just last month, Beijing reassured South Africa that China remains, quote-unquote, a trustworthy and reliable partner, as the tensions between Pretoria and the US continue to simmer. But beyond South Africa, several African nations, including Burkina Faso, Chad, Gambia, Liberia, Malawi, Senegal, and Sao Tome and Principe, have also severed diplomatic ties with Taiwan over the years. While tensions with Taiwan continue, South Africa's move signals a shift, strengthening ties with China while navigating growing strains with Washington. As Pretoria redefines its diplomatic path, the question remains, what does this mean for its future on the global stage? And staying in the region, our last story is about Zambia. It is grappling with a major environmental disaster. A toxic spill from a Chinese-owned copper mine has contaminated the Kafu River, a crucial lifeline for millions. The impact? Dead fish, destroyed farmlands, and entire communities cut off from clean water. The government is racing to contain the damage. But for those who depend on the river, the crisis is already devastating. How did this happen, and who will be held responsible? Our next report gets you all the details.
A river died overnight. That's how one Zambian described the catastrophic spill that has poisoned the Kafu River, the lifeline of millions. It wasn't just a disaster, it was a failure. A failure to protect and a failure to prevent. And at the center of it all is a Chinese-owned mining giant. On February 18th, a tailings dam holding acidic waste from the Sino-Metals Leach Zambia mine collapsed. 50 million litres of toxic mining waste spilled into the stream. The result, a poisoned river, a devastated ecosystem, and a crisis for millions who rely on the Kafu River for survival. This river was once full of life, but today it's a graveyard. Dead fish line the shores and farmland dried up from the toxic spill.
Prior to the 18th of February, this was a vibrant and alive river. We had cormorants, we had kingfishers, there was small masengas, the fishing was good. Now everything is dead. It's just like a totally dead river. It's unbelievable. Overnight, this river died.
The Chinese-owned mine poisoned more than just the water. it poisoned livelihoods. For farmers like Juliet Balaya, the disaster is deeply personal. Her fish pond, once teeming with life, is now a wasteland.
When I went to the fish pond, I found that the lime had flowed through the pond and all the fish had been swept away. I just stood in agony wondering what I would do about the money I spent on the project. I stood there watching because there was nothing I could do.
But she is not alone. Thousands of Zambian families have lost everything. The toxic spill forced the shutdown of Kitwe's water supply, cutting off 7,000 people from clean drinking water. And this is not just about Kitwe. The Kafue River feeds the homes of 5 million Zambians. What happens when the poison spreads? Zambia scrambled to contain the damage, deploying the Air Force to dump tons of lime into the river in a desperate attempt to neutralize the acid. Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema called for more help from experts. But this is a wound that cannot simply be covered up. The chairman of Sino Metals Leach Zambia apologized, but the anger remains and the problem runs deeper than a single mine. Another scandal has surfaced. Another Chinese-owned mine in Zambia's copper belt tried to hide yet another acid spill. And in a horrifying revelation, a worker at that mine fell into acid and died. What did the mine do? It continued operations until 2 Chinese mine managers were arrested. So this isn't just an accident, it's a pattern. China has poured billions into Zambia's mining industry, extracting its copper, which is a key component in smartphones and other technology. But while China profits, Zambia suffers. Chinese companies have been accused of disregarding safety regulations, labor laws, and environmental protections. And Zambia is trapped, burdened by over $4 billion in Chinese debt that has forced it to beg for restructuring after defaulting in 2020. However, the people of Zambia have had enough. Environmentalists and citizens are all speaking up. Their question: when will Zambia come first? The world depends on Zambia's copper. China depends on Zambia's copper. But what about Zambia's people? The Kafue River may never be the same again. But the real question is, will Zambia break free from this toxic cycle of exploitation?
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching and goodbye.
Firstpost brings you the Ideas Pod at the Raisina Dialogue 2025, the largest gathering of global policymakers, thought leaders, and innovators, now on the fastest growing international news platform. Big ideas, big debates, big impact. Only at the Ideas Pod.
Raisina Hill.
Firstpost gives you front row access to the conversations that matter most. The Ideas Pod. Raisina Dialogue 2025 on Firstpost.